Hey guys, welcome to this week's show. This week we're covering a very interesting topic, and that is inheritance. Imagine if you were gifted $100,000, what would you do with it? We're going to outlay a couple of game plans for you. I know they're going to help, and I look forward to seeing you in the show. Hey there guys, welcome to this week's Money and Investing Show with me, your host, Andrew Baxter, and as always, my faithful offsider, Mr. Mitchell Laurential.
I love that introduction. Thanks for having me on the show, Mr. Baxter. And we're going to spice it up today. We've been fairly informative in our previous podcasts of recent, so let's talk about something that's awfully fun. You've just been given $100,000 inheritance. What do you do with it?
Gee whiz, you could have some fun with that.
You could have some real fun, but that's probably not the best idea, which I know we'll touch on.
Indeed, I think with that being the fun piece, I think inheriting $100,000 has got the potential, I think, to set you up for the rest of your life, and in fact set up the next generation. And we always, when you think about inheritances, you think, oh, that's a bonus you weren't expecting. You've lost a loved one, and they've been kind enough to bequeath you something. But the old myth, and there's a certain amount of truth to this, it takes 3 generations in wealth: 1 to start it, 2 to steward it, and 3rd generation to lose it. And inheriting money and spending it is a great way of accelerating that. And that's happened to some of the biggest names, the biggest money family names in history. If you take the Vanderbilts over in the US, famous for, of course, Vanderbilt University, which is in
Nashville,
well done. Or if you look more locally, say at the Packer family, and James Packer's still worth $3.5 billion, but the guy inherited nearly 7. So you kind of look at it in that respect. A lot of pressure on inheriting a big sum like that, particularly in the case of James Packer being so public. But what can everyday folk do if they're gifted with $100,000? And I'd say the best thing you can do is not spend it and forget that you even have it. Not to ignore it and put it in the mattress or under the mattress and out of the way, but don't even be tempted to access it. Instead, get it working for you and set yourself, your family, and the next generation up.
Sure, and I know there's a couple of options which we're going to touch on at the end of this broadcast, but I think first and foremost, it's important to realize that when you do inherit this large sum of money, whether it be $50,000, $200,000, but for this example, it's $100,000. It's about the big picture. If someone's been, kind enough to give you that money as a gift, you've got an obligation morally to be able to steward it in a way that benefits everyone. It's about the big picture, the legacy.
I think that's very true, and it's a very responsible attitude to have. Easier said than done for some people.
Sure.
I think, we're off the valley, let's lock it up. Let's go buy a Harley Davidson.
Tattoo.
Whatever it might be. Everyone's got different ways they want to blow their dough. But, and unfortunately, you take that, you get that short-term endorphin burst of, I bought something new, or I had a great trip, and then it's gone. And it's a missed opportunity. And I guess the whole philosophy of what we espouse here at Money Investing is you spend the returns on your investment and not the principal.
Sure.
And that $100,000 is a great principle to be able to work with, and if you steward that properly, you've got the ability to not go to Bali once or buy a Harley, but have that lifestyle, if that's your thing, every year.
You've got to buy the bullet early and use it properly, and in the long run, you'll be able to do that 10 times over.
Set for life.
There you go.
Set for life. Have your own lotto ticket that you can set yourself up for life. So, I think one of the biggest things for people in that space is actually education and learning what to do, because it can easily burn a hole in your pocket. And it's for some people it's a large chunk of money, for others it's not. But not being overwhelmed by it and working out what is the best thing to do in order to get an outcome is critical, and that requires some level of financial education, no question about that.
Sure. Okay, well, let's take a step back. Let's talk about what not to do. Now, we briefly touched on Bali and Harley Davidson.
Yeah.
Overall, what's the overarching message? What don't you do with an inheritance of $100,000?
I've seen this happen plenty of times with people that are in my circle. Inherit money, go buy a car, go on holiday, buy some flash clothes, buy a watch, whatever it may be.
You can spend that in a day almost.
Easily. Maybe that might not be the case for some people, but you can burn through it pretty quickly. And if you need a new car, do you need a new car? You think you might need a new car.
Probably not.
And if that money is suddenly there, if it was such a burning need to have a new car, why don't you get your backside and made it happen for yourself without the need for the inheritance? Okay. That sounds really abrupt, I suppose. But if you really needed a new car that badly, what plan have you had in play for the last couple of years to make that a reality, rather than waiting for Aunt Mabel to fall off the perch and spend her dough? You know what I mean?
You probably don't need it as much as you think you do.
It's just something that's nice to have, and things that are nice to have fall out of favor very, very quickly. So don't make any big capital purchase on something that is not an asset. Okay, let's be very clear. Spend the money on something that's an asset. A car is not an asset.
Okay. So no holidays, no cars, no tattoos, no motorbikes, things like that.
I don't have anything against any of that. I don't have any tattoos, but I don't have anything against any of those things. But do it on your own dollar. Don't blow it, because you can set yourself for life. I know we're kind of repeating the same thing here, but it's critically important to understand that is the principle. It's sacrosanct. Don't dip into it, dip off the proceeds. And what that will do is to put some leverage on you to say, it's like looking in a shop window. The shop's not open. You can see what's in there and you probably want it.
Sure.
But you've got to come back when it's open. And the only way this particular shop opens is when that money's been put to work and it's spitting out interest, or it's spitting out dividends or rent or capital gain or premium or whatever it might be. And what it spits out is the thing you can handle. The other stuff, that stays behind glass. You can't touch it.
Well, there you go. That's a good analogy to put it. So let's talk about how to get it working then. What do you do? Now, bank interest, waste of time. We know that. We've covered that plenty of times. We can talk about property. We can talk about shares. So let's start off with property. $100,000 inheritance, Do you buy a house?
Look, I think that'd be a great thing to do for a lot of people. It depends on where you are within your circumstance, because if you've got enough money, 100 grand is going to get a deposit on a property. Not that big a property when you think about it from an investment point of view. There's a requirement now, for example, in Australia, currently it's 20% deposit for an investment property. So that caps you at 500,000. So that's the top end of the property you can buy. But it's not just about what you've got in terms of deposit, because these days, the banks are looking at what your serviceability is.
Sure.
So let's say, for argument's sake, you're a student, you're at uni, you inherit 100 grand and you want to buy a property. Well, you can't.
You can't service the mortgage.
You can't service the mortgage, so you're not going to qualify for a loan. So that door is kind of closed to you. If you're somebody that's working, maybe you already have a mortgage. In which case, again, it makes it a little challenging to say, well, we're going to buy another property. That whole serviceability thing is a huge one. So the notion of going buy a property, and trust me, I have no problem with property. I love it. It's been very kind to me. I bought my first property in London when I was 24, and I've bought plenty since. It is a great asset class. But the issues in today's world are more about serviceability and being able to get finance than anything. Plus, of course, you've got to look at where we are in the economic cycle.
Sure.
Are we going to see a pullback in property prices? And if so, it's probably better to hold off and come in and pick up the bones when it's all over.
So if you can service that mortgage, having $100,000 is a pretty big hurdle to overcome. It gets you in there a lot quicker. If you've already got savings, would you suggest maybe adding your savings to that inheritance to make it, say, $120,000 deposit?
Definitely. Does that then mean you'd go to a $600,000 property? I'd probably suggest not. I'd keep that gearing level down and keep the cap on there, because again, it's a trap that people can often fall into by being overexposed and overgeared. So if you've got more money to put in, maybe you've got a first home buyer grant you can toss in there as well, or whatever it may be. Don't get too excited and overgear. Be conservative with it, get it working, but get it working in a safe way. And don't be buying something in the back of the boondocks, something that's in an established place, that's going to give you reasonable rental growth and reasonable capital gain over time. Don't be looking to pick the next
hotshot suburb,
because that's a very dangerous game to get into.
Gotcha. Okay, well, let's talk about maybe our sort of special asset class that we love to talk about, and that's the stock market. Because for someone who can't service a mortgage but has a sum of money doing nothing in the bank, the stock market could be a good option.
Absolutely, and I'd say it would be my preferred option for somebody in that space for a lot of reasons. One, the potential for higher returns. Number two, the ability to manage risk. And number three, if you really want to, you can make it totally passive. So those three things, for most people, would tick a box: either the income, the risk management, or the time involvement, if we think about those. So let's start with the risk management first of all. On every investment we do, we put in play something called a stop loss, which is to protect your capital to the downside. There are other things that we also teach, like insuring your shares using put options to protect the downside. So all of a sudden you can have an investment which is giving you a good swing to the upside and good potential gain. But you've got that ability to sleep at night, not wake up in the middle of the night and have a heart attack like Mabel and then pass it on to the next generation. So you've got that ability for that peace of mind, which is incredibly important, especially for people that are new on this journey. One of the biggest hang-ups that people often have in terms of getting started in the stock market is what they perceive as risk. Yet when it's done properly, it can be one of the lowest forms of risk investment out there, particularly when you look at putting hedges in or put options.
Sure, and something like an index tracker might be a good idea because
So risk is the one thing satisfied.
Sure,
okay, so we can do that. Let's switch across now to something that's passive, and an index tracker would be a great place to go. And back in the day, people go, I've got a fund manager, I use a managed fund, but I think managed funds have been exposed to be not necessarily what people have expected over time. Number one, the performance typically of an active fund underperforms the index, and the statistics go back over virtually every time frame.
We did a podcast on that, if you remember correctly, the monkey.
And better yet, forget about the statistics, you can get a monkey
to pick better stocks.
What was that? Was it not Harvard? What was it? Was it in Forbes magazine?
Forbes magazine and Wall Street Journal, where the monkey was able to pick better stocks on average over 60 years than the fund manager.
Okay, so I mean, that still beggars belief, doesn't it? But
they can go and look it up. Our viewers, if you want to go and look it up, Forbes or Wall Street Journal.
Here's the gig: take $1,000 out of your $100,000 and go buy a monkey to manage your money. The way to go. So funds and funds management is kind of, the fee structure isn't great. So the big move over recent years has been into what's called exchange traded funds, index trackers, those sorts of things. So if you're looking for something passive there and you want exposure to the stock market, buying an exchange traded fund that just tracks the all ordinaries, the ASX 200, maybe the NASDAQ, which would probably be my preferred place to play right now, the S&P 500, the FTSE in London, you can track all of those. Maybe you want to dive a little bit deeper and say, look, I want to invest in banks, but I don't know which one. In which case you could buy an exchange traded fund that just invests in banks.
Sure.
That way you don't have the stock specific risk. And that's very passive. I'd say you still want to have a look at that, make a date with your money at least every month, if not every week, to see how it's traveling along. And that's a very, very important principle in money management. To make sure it's performing in line with, don't put it in the drawer and come back in 10 years time, make sure you're keeping an eye on it. And so, an index tracker versus a managed fund would be my recommendation.
Sure.
The great thing about them, they're very easy to buy and sell, Monday to Friday, 10 till 4, dead easy. Fees to do transactions are very low, management expenses are cheap, and typically they outperform managed funds.
Well, there you go. That's a good enough reason in itself. Any other advice in the stock market for someone who is looking to invest that inheritance, for example?
Okay, so we've talked about how to manage risk, now we've talked about being passive. The third way is to generate income, which is our meat and potatoes.
Sure.
We use a strategy we call cash flow on demand. $100,000 is a great position size to be working with there because, as you've seen from our clients, the possibility in the current market of being able to pull, $1,500 to $2,500 a week income out of an account that size is what some people out there doing right now. So if you're looking for that kind of income flow, that's key. And that will fund your Harley Davidson, it will fund your trip to Bali or whatever it might be. But again, that capital is behind the glass. You can't touch it. It's just working for you.
Sure.
If you add in that risk management underneath, it's behind bulletproof glass, so it's nice and safe.
Sure.
Cash on demand is a great strategy, but you need to be educated. You can't just simply throw a dart at the board and think you're going to be a success on the stock market. You're going to be a monkey to do that.
You do, and we're not monkeys. That's the main thing. Well, some people might say we are. Look, I think, even just a good point with that is, if you did invest in the stock market, you made a profit, let's say in 5 years' time, you can afford a mortgage. Why couldn't you keep some of the proceeds that you've made from trading in your account, buy a property, and all of a sudden you've got both assets, and that's a pretty good combination of having both.
And that's actually a very good strategy to use, and in fact that's what I used in my time. Working for a major financial institution, there are a lot of restrictions on what you can trade. So at the time for me, trading stocks when I worked in London was quite hard. We actually used to use spread betting, so we were betting on financial markets, which wasn't restricted as staff trading. But I used property as my vehicle for that. And I think, when you get some proceeds, park it into that asset class, leave the proceeds over here. So let's say you do put your 100 in, and it performs really nicely. You've got maybe 30-40% over a year or 2 years. You've now got 40 grand, plus you've got your 100 original. Take your 100 original, put it into a property, keep your 40 grand in the market, have that as your slave capital and build it up. And that's a very, very well time-tested path. And the stock market is a great place to create money. I don't think it's such a great place to store it. So if it's in there working, that's good. If it's pumping out income, and then park that money off into another asset class to store it, so to speak. And I think doing the withdraw to buy a property, we've had so many clients do that. They've been trying to save a deposit for a property, and they haven't quite had enough to get over the threshold. We've got that money working, it's over the threshold. They take the dough out in some cases, which kind of breaks our heart a little bit, but that's the purpose of what we've done, is help them achieve their goal. But something, in a lot of cases, people go, hang on a minute, let's leave it here and keep this growing a little bit more.
Sure.
And so, that becomes an individual choice. The key thing is you've got the working capital to make those choices. Dip into it, game over.
Yeah, I think that's the best advice possible, because it's about the long-term gain. So the wheels turning now, stretch the hamstrings. Before you know it, 10 years' time, when you're 30, 35, whatever it may be, you put yourself in a much better position.
100%. And there may be times where you do need to draw on that, but at that stage, you'd hope that you've become financially intelligent enough to make the right decisions, and also you're likely to be less frivolous on what you do with that money. Maybe that you take that 100 grand that you inherited and you actually use it to help pay your kids' tuition fees at uni because you stewarded it for long enough to get it to grow to be able to do that. And that will be really good financial management. Might sound boring, but everyone's different.
And just like you've been given that money, it's your job to then pass it on, as we mentioned, the generation theory.
It's a total individual pathway that we're all on in this life. And if you're fortunate enough to be gifted and inherit a chunk of money, be it 100 grand, and you go and blow it and have a great time and that's your life story, fantastic if that's the pathway you want to be on. I don't suppose too many of our podcast listeners sit in that camp, but if they are, have a great time, have a few shots on us. But if you're not in that space and you recognise that what you've been gifted is a set for life ticket, if you play your game smart, when you look back in 10 or 20 years time at what you've been able to create out of that particular asset, and you look back on your life and go, man, we've now got 6 properties and a large portfolio in the stock market, and we've got no debt or whatever it may be, because from mighty oaks, little acorns grow. So you take a small investment now, nurture it, and you can create a huge tree of opportunity for yourself. And that's really what inheritance can be, if that's the way you want to play it. Live hard and die young, or live long and have a great life, financially independent with no stress. And many thanks to Aunt Mabel every year with a glass of red to say cheers for the inheritance. I appreciate it.
The ball's in your court, and that's definitely the case here. And it's more important, you have to upskill yourself.
You've got to be able to do things for the right reasons, and it's interesting. Sometimes the right decision isn't about money either. When you inherit something, sometimes it's about following it through for the right reasons, what that person would have liked, or something that means more to your family than just the dollar aspect of it. And I've seen that happen too with property that's been inherited. And very close to the scenario, my mother-in-law, as a matter of fact, inherited a beautiful property on the beach. And most people expected them to demolish it and sell it off for development, and they haven't. They've kept it as a family beach house.
The sentimental value.
Absolutely. It's gone up in value, they'll make money from it, but they've done that in a way that was the right way to do it, where it wasn't, look at the gift I've got, let me just parlay that into something and do it quick and have a big bumper return and no thought process. Instead, they've played the long game, and they've got a property that's a beautiful property that they get to use, and we get to use from time to time. It stayed in the family, and it's gone up in value anyway, but the utility there and the memories and the intergenerational connection there, because it's not been blown, it's going to be passed on and passed on and passed on down the line as a family beach house, as opposed to, we sold that to a developer and they put a block of units on it.
There you go. I think the message is play it smart financially and emotionally. Look, AB, we are coming to the final parts of the broadcast. Are there any final words out there for our listeners?
Look, I think you've got to be strategic in life. Winning the game of life, winning the game of money. They are games, and like any game, there's a set of rules that are behind them. And if you understand what those rules are, you have a very good chance of winning the game. You often get teams that complain, it wasn't a very nice field or pitch to play on, but both teams had to play on the same pitch, right? And so you can put 2 people in exactly the same scenario with an inheritance, and one blows it. Maybe they have a good time on the way, that's great, and one turns it into something that's just incredible. And you've just got to choose which pathway best suits you. This isn't about changing who you are, it's just making you the best version of you that you can be. And if you're on this pathway, great stuff, enjoy it. Our job's not to change you, do what you got to do. If you're on this path, our job's not to change you either, but it's to help you get the most from that opportunity. And if you look back in 10 years' time at what was 100 grand and now it's $1 million, you can give yourself a decent pat on the back and you can shake yourself a Harley and a holiday.
There you go, AB. Look, thank you very much. That advice really is truly inspiring, number one, but so informative at the same time. If you're given an inheritance, listen to this because it's your go-to guide. Thank you very much.
My pleasure, Mitch. Chat soon.
Cheers.
Well, there you go, guys. A couple of pathways for you to choose, whether you're going to live hard and die young, or whether you're going to secure your future and that for your family. Give us a review and a rating. We'd love to see how you found the broadcast.